Prequel, The Walls in the Middle of Idemia, Chapter 4, Part B. The best way to counter the insults, he learned some time ago, was to show there was no basis for any of them. By the look of startled and reluctant admiration in Lazen's normally dull eyes, he was beginning to succeed. And hot corn buns, so far he was guessing correctly. Ideas were coming to him. Pieces were falling together in unexpected ways, and he felt he was seeing pictures focusing left and right in front of him. He just described what was unveiling in his mind, and for a moment he wondered where it was all coming from. But that moment passed because yet another idea was presenting itself. Jesse, you probably had some spies outside of the mansion seeing who goes in and out of the gates. True? Unsurprisingly, she didn't respond. That's how you saw me, and also my son. And Clematis, he pulled out a page filled with black and red writing. Jesse knew you sent this, I suspect. My note, Clematis cried. She was now fully free of her bands, thanks to her parents, and Pear winced to realize that he had accidentally sliced her cheek with his long knife, but she hadn't noticed the trickle of blood. She was getting to her feet, taking the note from his hands. You got it! I did, and it was well written, he told her as she blushed in pride. Your first attempt? She nodded, and her mother stood up to take the note. You can write? And read, Clematis said proudly. May I? Pear took it back. You may be able to read, but I don't think you fully understand what you sent me. On the back here, these numbers are what we call a formula. It's a taxation rate. Looks like they were experimenting with several. I can see that means nothing to you. What it means to the rest of the world, however, is that we have to send portions of our gold and silver to the mansion here so that the Quirrells and Jesse can live in luxury and opulence, and also to take care of you. However, according to the notes here, written by who I can only assume was Jesse's bookkeeper, she was wanting a larger portion of that income for her special projects. In fact, it seems she wanted another 20%. That's a huge amount of gold and silver, by the way. Enough to run a small village of 3,000 people. And Jessie wanted it all for herself, and Pear turned to the prisoner. How many do you employ? You said it yourself, you're a dead man. So what have you got to lose? Come on, Lazen. How many have been in your squads? Lazen sighed and said, Up to 60. Depends on the location, ease of job. Usually use 10 or less for each job. I'm not even sure I'm her only point man. Jessie let loose an entire round of profanity and screeches, but nobody paid any attention. Up to 60, Pear said, letting go a low whistle. Clematis, when you took this page from... Where did you get it, by the way? Fangy got it for me, from the kindling box, she admitted. He'd bring me many pages. Ah, clever again. When you took this page and wrote on the back of it, you didn't realize that you were revealing that Queen Jessie has private funds that no one else knows, and that she was altering the taxation rate for her own gain. It's illegal in Idemia, even for an old queen. But Jessie knew you'd sent it. She probably didn't know to where or why. She's frothing so much right now we will never get a clear answer from her. And judging by her current tantrum, I'm guessing she didn't realize you could write, or that you revealed that she was trying to kill my son. You read her message, too, didn't you? The one that was intended for the squad? She nodded, partly proud, partly worried that she was in trouble. Well done, Pear said, to put her at ease. And because all is silent on the other side of that wall, I'm assuming my men did their job well. 30 soldiers in disguise with 40 backup all around the mansion walls should have subdued the killing squad. How many for this job? Pear asked Lazen. He slouched. For teenagers, need only 5. They have no skills. How nice, Pear said bitterly. An easy job. He began walking over to the gate to verify what he was 99% sure was correct, that his son was still alive and that there was no killing squad waiting. But he didn't expect the sudden panic of the family. "No!" they cried out. "Don't do it! Stay away from the gate! It's death!" After that, he couldn't discern what they were saying because of the wailing and shouts. He turned around and saw that the women were now being shoved rapidly back through the narrow door, with men standing guard around them and yelling warnings. "Whoa!" Pear said, holding up his hands. "Whoa, whoa, stop!" He marched back over to them, and their yells subsided. Their shoving slowed. A few women even came cautiously back outside. "What in the world is wrong?" Pear paused. Oh, I get it." With new fury, he turned to Fourth. "Well done. Your father and grandfather and great-grandfather taught these people to be scared of the wall and terrified of the gate, haven't you? Unbelievable. I wondered why none of them ever tried to leave before, but look at them. You drill for this, don't you? Teach them how to run and hide and shelter each other in preparation for absolutely nothing." The Fourth stood firm. "The training has always been of good use. No one's ever infiltrated these grounds." His voice trailed off as Pear pointed to the prisoner still being held and looking bored. "I'm guessing he's infiltrated a few times," Pear said. "And guess what, Fourth? So have I. Want to know why your mother wants to kill my son? Probably because he accompanied me in one of my infiltrations of your mansion. Aha! Finally, a look of shock on your face. It's about time. I've been here twice, Quirrell, and no one here ever knew except Fangy and Clematis. Not even you. So much for your good training." Fourth began to huff. "How dare you come into my mansion?" "Trying to find your wife, Fourth," Pear reminded him. "I didn't find her, but I sure found a lot of other interesting activities. And you know what? It stops today, right now. Look," he turned to the family, "I sense you feel betrayed, and I sense you don't know who or what to fully believe. And I assume it's going to take you a long time to believe anyone ever again. But please, put a little faith in me right now. Nothing out there will harm you, I promise. I brought 70 soldiers with me, plus a few other helpers, to prove to you that the world is safe for you again, that you can come out, that you can be part of it. Just let me open the gate." He wasn't prepared for a dozen men to suddenly rush him, circle him, and link arms, another tactic they'd clearly practiced. "All right," Pear said, curious as he observed his small prison made of men. "And this is to—" "Keep you confined until help arrives," one man told him. Pear scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Nice idea, men, but honestly, you look like you're playing a children's game. Notice that my officers aren't even alarmed? They look amused, actually. And now I wonder who is supposed to come help you." It was almost comical, had it not been so sad, how each of the dozen men glanced at each other to see if he had an answer. "Here's an idea," Pear continued conversationally. "Let's all walk slowly, yes, slowly, over to the gate. I won't open it. I just want to get reassurance from my sergeants that all is well. All right, let's go together. Shall I count to 3? Will that help? 1, 2, 3. Ah, very good. Look how fun this is. And that is close enough." He cleared his throat as his circle of new friends stopped. "Duvera, Longton." "Yes, sir," their voices came over the gate. "Status?" "All is secure, sir. Easy capture, and you were right. They were all wearing straw hats with brims. The backup you sent is taking them to the garrison now." The men surrounding Pear looked at each other questioningly. Some were ready to believe the High General, but some still suspected this was all some kind of a setup. "Well done," Pear called back. "How many?" "5, sir. Should there have been more?" "No, apparently not." "Do you need help, sir?" No, thank you, man. Let's say I'm taken care of right now. However, call for the wagon to approach. You know the one, right?" "Yes, sir. And, sir, Someone here wants to know if the young lady is fine? Pear smiled. Ralph was worried about Clematis. Yes, tell that person that we reached her in time, but just barely. I assume that he is also safe? Clematis had stepped away from her parents and was approaching Pear and his new circle of friends, wondering about Ralph. Had a tricky moment, sir, Duvera called over. He was a little worried. Oh, apparently I wasn't supposed to say that. Stop hitting me in the shoulder, boy. Anyway, he was never in any real danger. We kept him safe. Pear sighed in satisfaction and nodded at Clematis. She beamed and clapped her hands in relief. Pear almost felt like doing the same thing. While he didn't relish the idea of using his son as bait, Ralph had. But apparently not anymore. They'd have a conversation later, he was sure. Thank you, sergeants, and well done. Stay close, men. I may be chatting with you again. He could practically hear them shrugging in confusion to each other. This wasn't going to plan. The gate should have been thrown open some time ago. But obediently they called back, Right, sir. He looked at his entourage, still questioning each other with their eyes. Was this believable or a trick? Shall we head back to the mansion? Pear asked if they were simply taking a walk around the grounds. Or stay here a bit? Your call. But I'd really like to show you it's safe out there. What do you say? A middle-aged man strode purposely from the mansion. No, it's all a trap. Can't you see? He's upsetting poor Quirrell, has Jessie all worked up, and is manipulating our children. He's planning something. Pear was losing patience. All of this was taking too long. Why? He said simply. I mean, really, why? Why would I want to lure you out? What can you possibly offer me or the world? It sounded harsh, but nothing else was working. You're unskilled. This little circle thing is useless. Look. And he plowed successfully through two older men whose link was pretty weak. Ignoring their protests, he continued on to the man. You're behind the times. You can't read or write or do math. Not most of you, I'm sure. Maybe you're good at farming and animals, but frankly, those cattle are on the lean side, and your corn should be taller this late in the season. I'm sorry, but you're unnecessary to the world. You benefit me in no way whatsoever. Yet here I am, wanting to help you. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Because you deserve a chance to make your own decisions. Because you deserve to live. I'm getting nothing from this. In fact, I didn't even get a minute of sleep last night trying to find a way to save my son, your family's daughter, and all of you. And what do? Accuse me of trying to trap you. Guess what? You're already trapped. You have been for decades. Haven't you yet learned to see what's really going on the other side of that stone wall? He didn't expect to find Fangy at his belly again. I want to go outside, Pear, he said quietly. Can I go with you? Fangy! His mother cried. Pear held up a reassuring hand. To Fangy he said, Not without your mother's approval, but as soon as she says yes, then yes. Prove it, someone in the crowd said. Prove that it's safe out there. Gladly, Pear said. What would you have me do? Stick your head over that wall. If it's not filled with arrows, then I'll believe you. Pear scoffed a chuckle, but realized no one else was. Oh, you're serious? Really? That's what you think will happen? He looked to Forth, who was examining a cuticle. Jessie, too, was gazing elsewhere. I see. That's what they've been telling you all these years, isn't it? Ever have a body come over that wall filled with arrows? Their grim faces told him the answer. Oh, I see, he said again, more soberly. I'm very sorry. I should have realized. Well, if that's what it will take. Anyone have a ladder? Maybe in the barn down there? No, said Reckon, who had been part of the failed circle of men. If you use a ladder, they'll see that at first and it'll signal that you're coming. But not if it's a ladder shorter than the wall, Pear pointed out. No one was about to move. Logic wasn't the strongest skill here, he had realized a while ago. He squared his shoulders. All right, then. And no warning your soldiers, Reckon said in a low voice. Go up quietly, don't give yourself away, and let's just see how safe the world is. He looked across all their faces. Many wore expressions of pity. They didn't think he was going to survive. Others were defiant, sure this would be the end of the High General. Still others seemed hopeful, as if they'd been wishing someone would at least try it. Clematis bit her lower lip in worry, but nodded encouragingly. What a dear girl, he thought. Not a sour face whatsoever. Sorry I gave her that slash that will likely become a scar. War wound, though. She can wear it proudly. Then I'll go over. No problem for a slender, toned man like me to climb over a 12-foot-high stone wall. His officers were casting him looks of doubt, but one lieutenant pointed out, Down there a way, sir. Notice how the rocks jut out more? Simple up and over, sir. You can do it. Reckon stepped forward again. Take off your jacket. That's a signal as to who you are. I want no one on the other side to recognize you right off. Pear kept his face sober, deciding now wasn't the time to explain that shortly after he was installed a few weeks ago, he made it a point to shake the hand of every last soldier in the garrison. Every single man on the other side of the wall knew who he was, jacket or no. Nor was there another man quite his height or stature, but no matter. Fair enough, Pear said, unbuttoning his brass buttons of his jacket, then taking it off. A few women gasped, and Pear worried for a moment. Yes, he was big, but his clean white undershirt covered him quite completely. Then he noticed Reckon and everyone else staring at his hip. Oh, this? Pear handed the man his jacket and pulled out his long knife. Yes, I left several blades on your breakfast table, but I'd never leave all of them. I realize you may think that I wasn't completely truthful with you, but I never would have pulled this on any of you, and I had ample opportunities. Reckon held out his hand for Pear to give it to him, but the High General shook his head. You don't get to command an entire army by being wholly unarmed. This one stays with me, to protect you. He slid it easily back into his waistband, moved down the wall to where the lieutenant had suggested, and took a deep breath. It'd been years since he'd climbed, and now he had a captive audience. It would be humiliating to slip and fall. He better not, then. After surveying the wall, he chose his route, placing a boot on this jutting rock, reaching for that little outcropping, and steadily made his way upward. To his surprise, it was easier to scale than he anticipated. The bulbous rocks made natural holds all over the wall. The family could have scaled and hopped over this a dozen times a day if they'd only tried. Still, he was grunting and straining near the top, swearing under his breath that, yes, it might be a good idea to lose 30 pounds, or 100. His right hand grasped the top of the wall, and he was peripherally aware of Clematis and Fangy bouncing up and down in encouragement. Don't lose it now, he murmured to himself. Come on, Perry boy, one more little stretch. You've got this, big guy. Oof! With a mighty heave and a last kick upward, he got his chest to the top of the wall, then hauled the rest of himself up. Exhausted, he lay on his belly on the wide stone wall to catch his breath. He'd completely forgotten that arrows were supposed to be coming at him right now. But the family hadn't forgotten. They were holding their collective breath and anticipation. Pear didn't notice at first. He was watching his sergeants, who must have heard his grunts and huffing. They'd walked down and were looking up at him. Sir? Long story, he panted. Don't shoot any arrows, all right? The sergeants glanced at each other. Were we supposed to bring bows and arrows? Longton asked. Nope, don't worry about it, boys. I think I've almost got them convinced. Oh, hello, son. Having a good morning? Ralph was grinning like a maniac. What are you doing, Father? We could just open the gate. No, don't. I'm trying to prove a point. Ah, and here's my dear wife. Banu, why are you looking at me like that? Oh, and you brought Matilda and Mrs. Kale. See, Mrs. Kale, I do get exercise. You're redder than a tomato, General, Mrs. Kale smirked. I wish I could get up there and take your pulse, because I'd guess it's so high I could hardly count it. You'd be right, he confessed, but not because I'm exhausted, but because I'm trying to prove that I'm not about to be killed. Banu paled. What? Long story. He told us that, too, Longton told her consolingly. There was a commotion behind him, and Pear twisted to see what was happening on the inside of the wall. Clematis was striding bravely to his position, her parents running after her. No, you don't, her father was saying. It could still be dangerous. Clematis, Pear called down, listen to your father. While there is no danger, I don't want you disobeying him. How about someone else come on up? Look, and although he really dreaded doing it, he sat upright, then stood on top of the wall, 2 feet wide, willing himself not to look down. Even though he was such a tall man, heights really weren't his thing. Some of the family began to applaud his achievement, while others were still watching the other side as if counting down to when an arrow might come over and take him out. Queen Jessie rolled her eyes dramatically. A fat man climbs a wall, and you all think that's something. It is, called out a voice Pear didn't expect. Seraphina. The old woman was elbowing her way through her sons. You want to volunteer? Here I am. Mother, one of the men exclaimed, how will you get up there? By you pushing me up, what did you expect? Come on, the 2 of you. I'm going to prove something today. I want out. Pear was grinning now and realized that he wasn't alone on the wall. Mrs. Kale was hoisting herself up next to him, having scaled it with no problem, even with her skirt in the way. She beamed down to the family. Why, hello there! They stared at her aghast. She was an older woman, and not a soldier, seemingly healthy, if only they knew how much, Pear thought, since the 60-year-old woman ran to the garrison for fun, and here she was greeting them cheerfully. Ma'am, she called down to Seraphina, we could just open the gate. Nope, Seraphina said, holding out her arms to her sons. They shrugged at each other, then picked up the old woman and started to push her up the wall. You could help a little, Mother. At least grip that rock there and the one above it. Come on, Mother, we're not that tall. Or that young, the other son gasped, a man probably close to 70. Seraphina was now giggling like a little girl, and was past the reach of her sons, who watched her in awe as she climbed on her own, up to the waiting hands of Pear and Mrs. Kale. They strained to pull her up the last bit, since she stopped climbing herself, and soon Seraphina was sitting on the wall, looking out in reverent awe. Welcome, Pear said, and sat down next to her. That sad orchard needs trimming. We've started on it, but... Shh, Seraphina said in a whisper. You talk too much, High General. Anyone ever told you that? Look at that view. Just look. It's dawn. Pear smiled and glanced behind Seraphina to Mrs. Kale. The bacon-hating woman had tears streaming down her face. Down below, Banu and Matilda clasped hands in anticipation. Seraphina hadn't noticed them yet, but she would once she was done watching the sun rising, brightening the hundreds of rooftops in Idumea, sunlight glistening off the large windows and illuminating treetops and flower gardens. The only sounds were from birds chirping in the orchard, and no battles anywhere. It's so peaceful, she finally said. Pear nodded, not daring to speak in case she chastised him again. Is it always? Mostly, Pear said. Not always. But it's worth it, Seraphina. It's worth it. What did I say about you talking too much, General? Pear chuckled. After another moment, Seraphina sighed deeply. All right then, let's go. Oh, which way? Per asked. He was aware that the entire family, except for the men holding the prisoner, were now at the bottom of the wall looking up. We go on, Seraphina said simply. Out there. Mother, called up one of her sons. She twisted to look down at him. What are you waiting for? Get up here! Somebody has to get me down the other way. Her sons grinned and began to climb, their own sons and grandsons pushing them playfully up the first part. Scoot down, Per said quietly to Mrs. Kale. They don't realize that they can come up any part of this wall. Behind them, Jessie was shrieking again, screaming for them to stop, to come back, but no one listened. Quirrell the Fourth sat down despondent on the ground, watching as now 3, 5, 10 of his servants scaled the stone wall. Next to him, Fifth finally spoke. Father, who's going to cook breakfast? Orrin was asleep on the dewy grass. Seraphina was now looking down, waving back to Banu and Matilda, who were happily waving up. I'm Banu Shen, Per's wife. So happy to meet you. We've got a wagon. Where do you want to go? Do you need something to eat? I brought bacon pancakes. Per whistled once, and suddenly out of the trees dropped more than 24 young farmers, smiling welcomingly and holding out hands to help Seraphina and anyone else down. Seraphina glanced at Per, worried, but he said, They're mine. They're here to help. Trust them. I do. All right then, Seraphina said, and pushed off. Fortunately, 3 soldiers were right there to catch her, and Per held his chest in fright. Mrs. Kale gripped his arm, also sure that old Seraphina was about to fall to her death, and that would have ruined the entire day. Banu and Matilda brought Seraphina to the wagon, and 2 soldiers gingerly helped her onto the bench. One rescued so far, Mrs. Kale whispered. Oh, General, thank you for inviting me along to witness this. Actually, he confided, as they shifted awkwardly down the wall they straddled to let the next wave of 5 reach the top, I asked you along in case any of these females needed medical attention. But if you find anything enjoyable about this, and he couldn't go on. Something was caught in his throat, and his vision was blurring. They were coming, all of them who were able. They stood as damp lumps below and cheered as their fuzzy relatives reached the top, then sat in amazement and gazed out at the smudgy orchard. Per wished there was a better view for them, but if they saw it as splotchily as he did, it didn't matter. In time, they'd have all kinds of views. He sniffled and wiped his nose, forgetting that he didn't have his jacket on, but was drying his nose on his bare arm. Behind him, Mrs. Kale handed over a handkerchief. A cold, Per explained as he blew his nose. Understood, she said quietly back, and patted his shoulder. Incidentally, I think you're becoming an outstanding High General, even if you won't follow my diet, and your wife brings bacon pancakes. Who in the world makes bacon pancakes? He burst out laughing, knowing that released a few more tears he wasn't expecting. He quickly wiped his face and nose again and tucked the handkerchief into his trousers pocket. He might need it again. Seraphina's sons and 3 more women were now nearly down the orchard side of the wall, being aided by soldiers and shown to the other wagons which were coming to transport them. Per had spoken last night to a couple of rectors in Idumea, who agreed to house the family, however many would agree to leave, in one of their rectories until Holy Day. They'd have food and a place to sleep until, well, those details hadn't been hashed out yet. There'd be a lot of work to do in the next few days. He glanced over again to the mansion and saw his lieutenants speaking to the last 4 men of the family, who were guarding the prisoner, 2 of them in green. It was clear by their earnest expressions that they wanted to join everyone else going over the wall, but someone needed to hold Lieutenant Colonel Lazen. Per began to open his mouth, intending to call for his farmer soldiers to toss him up the chains they used for prisoners, but he was too slow. So eager to head over to the wall were the last 4 men that they didn't pay attention to the lieutenants trying to take over, and they released Lazen too soon. "No!" Pear cried out, but it was too late. Lazen broke free of his guards and sprinted for the wall, much further down. With cat-like agility, he nearly ran up the wall. Obviously, he'd gone over before, and probably quite frequently, and was on his way to freedom. Except that Pear had scrambled to his feet, forgetting his fear of the height, and had drawn his long knife. With an aim he'd practiced for 20 years, he threw the knife. For a moment, Pear wasn't sure where it went, because Lazen was now at the top of the wall, crouched as if to jump, but he hesitated, looked down, then shifted his gaze to Pear with unmistakable hatred. Jutting out between his ribs was the handle of Pear's long knife. For a few terrible seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. They all just stared at Jesse's nephew, who began to slowly sway, then tipped over and fell into the orchard. 6 farmer soldiers converged on him immediately, but Pear already knew what they'd call out. "Lazen's dead, sir!" "Stale biscuits," Pear mumbled, putting his hands on his waist. One of the people next coming up the wall was Reckon, who had crested the wall just in time to see Pear's perfect throw. "Stale biscuits," he said. "Why, that was a remarkable aim. How'd you do that?" "Years of practice," Pear said dully. "I could never outrun a man, but I can always outthrow him. But," he said with renewed annoyance, "I had more questions for Lazen. Now I'll not get those answers. Nor the record book he claimed he kept, which I doubt is in his quarters or office at the garrison. Well, a thorough search might turn it up." The horror of having just killed one of his officers would descend upon him in the middle of the night, he knew, when he remembered the last living look of Lazen, the look of fury, hatred, and pure surprise. And Pear would stare at the ceiling for a few hours, wondering who else wore the uniform that he needed to worry about, and maybe not get too chummy with. He stopped a few garters in his day with his knives, at least he'd assumed he had. He'd thrown, they'd caught, then limped off into dark forests, and he'd be glad he was supply officer so he could requisition himself new long knives again and not reveal just how many he'd given to the forest. But he'd never see a man die right before him, with his knife jutting out, his accuracy unmistakable. He could always outthrow men in fort competitions, yet this was different. "But you'll get your knife back, right?" Reckon asked, pulling Pear out of his sinking reverie. For once, Pear wouldn't have to resupply himself, and a dark chill coursed through him. He'd killed an officer, one of his officers, and he'd get the knife back. How lovely. It had to be done, right? Actually, he hadn't intended to kill at all, just to maim, slow down. Pear felt weak. Perhaps the excitement of the morning, the lack of sleep the night before, the absence of breakfast, it was all getting to him. No, the fact that he had killed one of his own men was getting to him. Reckon positioned himself on the wall, his first view of the world now being that of the farmer soldiers inspecting the corpse in the orchard. In a softer voice he said, "I see now how great a sacrifice it was for you to leave so many blades on our table." Pear scoffed in sad agreement. "Never be without a weapon," he whispered. "Rule number 1. Well, it should be. I think I'll write up some rules," he mused out loud, observing his soldiers. He had to shove away the cold chill and the heaviness that wanted to topple him from the wall. He was the head of the army now. He had to maintain composure, had to be the solid symbol. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed his 2 sergeants glancing up at him with too much admiration. A dozen more soldiers were looking up, too, with new respect. The story would get around as to what happened here with their high general. By dinner, the entire garrison would have a version that had likely grown larger than the wall itself, with creative additions, side plots, curlicues, and likely a lot more bloodshed. This event would be remembered and held up as an example of what? Per worried. It was out of his hands now. Too many witnesses, too many variations of the knife thrown. Depending on how the men regarded him, some would assert that Per had thrown it 1/4 of a mile with lightning speed, throwing Colonel Lazen all the way to pools with its impact. Other men would argue that Shin had merely dropped his knife, and Lazen was unfortunate enough to be underneath it. Whatever the case, Per knew that from this day forward, the army would have a new view of him. If that was good or bad remained to be seen. Maybe he could see to it that the story wouldn't get around at all. But, sir, you're weaponless now. Reckon again interrupted his thoughts, for which Per was most grateful. Per looked down at him. I only seemed to be. And he held out a hand to help the man stand up. Reckon held on to it for a moment and whispered, Could you teach me to throw like that? If we're going to be part of the world, I should probably learn how to defend myself. I can teach you how to throw, certainly, Per smiled grimly, but you can also trust my soldiers to defend your family. That's what they're here for. All right, not Lazen. He's a terrible example, but he's exactly who I'm trying to flesh out. I'm going to get them all, I promise you, Reckon. Every last threat. That's my job, and I won't quit until I'm a success or I've died trying. Together they watched the soldiers pick up Lazen's body and carry it to a much further wagon, away from the joyful family gathering below. Per's long knife had been extracted, wiped off on the dead man's shirt, then handed to Ralph. Per cringed to realize his son had been watching all of that far too closely. At least there was a look of apprehension and some revulsion in his son's eyes as he stared at the weapon he slowly walked back to the wall. Banu and Matilda had smartly turned away before Lazen fell, and Mrs. Kale had been making ready to go down the wall to lend assistance until it was clear that Lazen wouldn't need diet suggestions ever again. See, Per said quietly to Reckon, as the wagon with the body pulled away. Already the world is one man safer than it was a few minutes ago. Strangely, and despite all that I've seen, Reckon said, I believe you. Am I completely naive? Yes, you are, Per told him, and that's a perfectly fine way to begin. Further down the wall, Ralph, who had tucked his father's long knife into his own belt, was scaling the side of the rock as easily as a squirrel, and he peered over the edge. Scanning the crowd, he soon saw who he was looking for. Clematis! She was still standing between her parents, who seemed just about ready to let her follow the others. She beamed when she saw Ralph, propped up by his elbows on the wall and leaning over to see her. How'd you get up there? It's not hard, he said modestly, but Per could see his feet scrambling for a foothold. In her enthusiasm to see him again, Clematis didn't even notice she was hastily climbing up the wall, her parents rushing to catch up with her. What happened to your cheek? Ralph called down to her. Your father did that, she said casually, pushing her full skirt aside as she looked for another rock. Ralph's head snapped to his father. Long story, Per called out, over the half-dozen bodies between them. Down below, Long Tin said, That's what he keeps saying, long story. Ralph shrugged and leaned down to reach a hand to Clematis. She didn't take it, but managed her way to the top of the wall, then perched proudly on top. Ralph twisted to sit next to her. Wow, she whispered. Just wow. This is nothing, Ralph said offhandedly. An ugly orchard. There are nicer ones, but you can see parts of the city, the nicer houses at least, just over there. And wait until you see the other villages. Most people never travel. They just stay in the village they were born in. But I've seen lots of places because my father used to inspect all the fort supplies. There are hot pools and pools. There are waves at waves, and fields of flax and flax, and... Those are village names? Clematis asked. Places aren't named very creatively, are they? She pointed out. Ralph pondered that. Well, there's sands because of the desert sands, and orchards has... Yeah, orchard's nicer than this, and you're right. At least you know what to find in those villages. She grinned. Ralph? Yes. I know what orchards are, but what are hot pools and waves and flax and sands? The innocence of her question so startled Ralph, he didn't know how to answer her. Everyone in the world knew what those things were. He stammered for a moment, then said, I brought you books, just in case you left the mansion. My mother has a whole crate full in the wagon, easy reading books, and some math books, too. And I think there's even one about villages of the world. There are woodcuts. Those are drawings that show you what all this stuff is. You can have them all. Clematis bit her lip in delight and turned to take in the view of trees and rooftops. Thank you. I'll never forget that you were the one who told me about 101. I can't stop thinking about it. There's something bigger that I only guessed at, but didn't dare believe. And all the numbers after it, too much. And now books. You're too kind. Blushing, he bumped her shoulder with his. A moment later, her father's head popped up between them, and he shoved himself between the two of them, giving Ralph a pointed glare. Ralph quickly wriggled himself down the wall a safe distance. Clematis's father was now easily swinging himself on the wall, his focus solely on Ralph, who was beginning to squirm and worry. She saw you, is that right, in the mansion? Ralph gulped. Yes, sir, it was an accident. We didn't even know she or the rest of you were in there. Her father's chest heaved as if he was readying to yell. Then something seemed to pass by him. He relaxed and tipped his head. Thank you, he said quietly. I'm glad you're both safe. But I don't like this, he added, his tone sharpening. I don't. Ralph nodded rapidly. I understand, sir, although he didn't. Clematis's father looked over to Pear, who nodded back once. He understood. While he never had a daughter, he could see many things that her father didn't like. Nothing was now easily decided. Nothing in the future was clear. Today, everything became much more difficult. Options meant decisions and choices, and some would go wrong. That wasn't a bad thing, though. Clematis's family descended on the other side, with Ralph following at a safe distance. With the family enjoying the trip up and down the wall, Pear felt it now safe to signal to De Vera and Longton that they could subtly open the gate. The captains, still holding Jessie against the wall, could use some relief. The sergeants headed into the compound with chains for the old queen. No one of the family noticed the soldiers binding Jessie's arms and legs, but Quarrel the Fourth did. He stared mutely from his spot on the grass, seeming not to comprehend what was happening with his mother. Pear almost felt sorry for him. Fourth hadn't been king very long, only a couple of moons, ever since his father had died. Talk about a man who loved killing squads. Pear sometimes wondered who enjoyed organizing random deaths in the world more, Jessie or Third. It was probably how they kept their marriage going. Their son, however, didn't have a deliberately mean bone in his body, nor did he have an intelligent one either. He always seemed a few steps behind and was constantly bullied by his parents. When Third died, it was as if the world had breathed a little easier, not knowing much about Fourth, but assuming he wasn't as bloodthirsty. Nobody could be as bloodthirsty as Third and Jessie, but no one expected his mother to continue controlling him, running the world which legally was now her son's to rule. Fourth had inherited the leadership of the world, but didn't know how to lead it. Never mind feeling sorry for the Fourth, Pear amended his thoughts. Feel sorry for the world. But right now, today, there was hope. He doubted they could imprison or execute Jessie, but today was a turning point in just how much power she could wield. They were still stuck with Fourth, but at least his snarling guard dog was, today, losing her teeth. Jessie, fully bound but able to walk and somewhat move her arms, wasn't about to go quietly to the wagon that would bring her to the garrison for questioning. Oh, no. She flailed and screeched and broke free from the captains to waddle, wailing, to the front doors of the mansion. Astonished at the sight, the captains hesitated, then began running after her until a sharp whistle from Pear stopped them. He waved them over to the wall on which he was still standing, his officers looking behind them anxiously after the screaming queen. "Let her go," Pear said. "What can she do? She's chained, and soon she'll discover there's not a single person left in that huge house who's going to help her. Let her throw her little tantrum. She's had a hard morning. I predict we'll find her in a few hours, spent and sobbing on a sofa somewhere. Then she'll be a lot easier to move." "But, sir," said one of the captains, "you left your belongings on the servants' eating room table." "Moldy beef!" Pear exclaimed. "I forgot. All right, run in there, get my weapons, then get back out here with them, and don't let Jessie near you." His captains nodded and sprinted back to the mansion, Pear muttering his hopes that they got his supply of long knives and sword before Jessie could. Despite her chains, she could still do some damage to someone. His gaze tracked down to the open gate, which all of the family was ignoring except for one member. A couple of soldiers had entered the compound to lend assistance, and they discovered old Danny, now fully revived and scowling in confusion. A soldier seemed to be explaining to Danny what was going on, and led him out the gate to the other side. Pear could just hear his conversation over the chuckles and exclaims over the last family to come over the wall. "So we're doing this?" Danny said incredulously. "We're leaving? Wait, did I just come through the gate?" Seraphina, in conversation with Banu, paused to chuckle at him. "Welcome to the world, Danny. Yes, we're doing this. But you did it wrong. You're supposed to go over the wall. Go back and do it right." Danny reached over and patted it. "Just a cloudy blur to me, but I remember it from years past. Why not just go through that gate?" "Good question," Pear called down. "Sir, you may now do whatever you wish. You don't have to follow anyone else. You can think and do what you believe is best. That's freedom." "Freedom to think, huh?" Danny said. "I think I want breakfast because I'm hungry." "Oh!" Bano cried out, pulling from behind her a giant picnic basket. "I've got just what you need. Bacon pancakes, a specialty of mine." Danny perked up. "Really? Freedom is bacon pancakes, huh? All right, I'll give it a chance." Pear knew Mrs. Kale was still behind him, calling out encouragement to the last women going down the wall. He leaned back enough to say to her, "Never underestimate the power of bacon pancakes, Mrs. Kale." She laughed. "Fine. Bacon wins today, but not tomorrow." Pear grunted his disagreement and chuckled with her. What a fantastic morning, he thought, once you look past the whole Lazen incident. The sunshine, the orchard, the wagons filling with people, the excitement of leaving, the terrible thrill of a new life. It wasn't going to be easy, not by a long throw. He couldn't even imagine what struggles they'd face trying to make peace of the world that had been at peace for 80 years. Their entire way of thinking would have to change. But today, they could revel in that change. And Pear decided that all around, it would be a good thing. No, an excellent thing. Except for a few people. The fourth was still sitting forlornly and dazed in the grass, his son Fifth having plopped next to him, equally confused but with a bitter bent. The fifth was too much like his grandparents, and Pear knew something had to be nipped in the bud. Orrin, however, continued to doze and would likely wake up a few hours later, not remembering a thing. "Time for me to go down," he said to Mrs. Kale. "Some unfinished business. I know you're primarily a diet person, but you do have some training, right? In scrapes, broken bones, egos damaged by tumbling down a wall." She chuckled. "Yes, I'm a fully trained surgeon's assistant, and I have my bag of supplies. Should you tumble, High General, I can patch you up. All except for that ego." I was afraid of that. If I may make a suggestion, she leaned over to whisper, whatever happens, pretend to have planned it that way. A little rolling, a little flourish. I can tell you have a dramatic flair. Play to that. No one will ever be the wiser. He twisted to see her clearly. You are a very smart woman. I'm going to have to remember that. You could have a few soldiers help catch you, she added. Oh, hot gravy, no. I'd never live that down. Obviously, you know nothing about egos. Only too much, she mumbled as Pear laughed. He twisted himself to be feet first and started to work his way down the mansion side of the wall. It was tougher going down, harder to find footholds, until he decided to just make what was about to happen look like part of the plan. He let go, pushing off the wall, and landed fairly well on his feet, to his surprise, but his knee was never going to forgive him. Ow, 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 he murmured as he tried to walk without a limp, not too successfully, toward the miserable quarrels. Before he reached them, his captains came jogging out of the back door of the mansion, Pear's knives and sword in their hands. He noticed his jacket, the symbol of his status and power throughout the world, tossed over a gravestone, and he gingerly retrieved it. There were 4 tally marks on that stone. He nodded respectfully to it and made a mental note to send someone from the fort to make a full counting. Maybe a few mysteries could be solved, but since there were no dates, names, or even genders, likely not. Putting on his jacket, he was official again, and he didn't realize how anxious he'd felt until his officers handed him back his knives and sword. It didn't feel right to not be clanking. The steel was comforting. He tipped his head to indicate the captains should follow him. Whatever I say, he said quietly to them as they neared 4th and 5th, follow my lead. I'm trying to stave off a potential problem, and you 2 will be my helpers. You wrote the report last year, right? Well, I may be adding to that report, if you get my meaning. Yes, sir, they murmured back. One said, and thank you, sir, for listening to us. If I ever forget to listen in the future, remind me, he answered, loudly, until I pay attention. I don't want to be a stumpy. Appreciated, sir. Already you've done more than he ever did. A few minutes later, they came to the quarrels mourning on the grass. Despite the pain in his knee, Pear kneeled down in front of 4th. The wretched man looked up at him. You've ruined everything. Oh, good, Pear said. That was my plan. Quirrell, you know this was wrong. You couldn't possibly think holding these people all these years was ever the right thing to do. But we own the world. No, you do not. I know that's what your father said, what your mother pounded into that tiny brain of yours, but no, you do not own the world or anything in it. Your great-grandfather took over ruling the world only because he was the most powerful bully, and you merely inherited the throne, which I could never figure out how that made any sense. But you have to be better than them, 4th. You have to listen to the world. I warned you before, but now I know. I just saved your life. Yours and 5th's and Oren's there. How does he sleep with all of this going on? Never mind. The fact is, you were about to die. 4th frowned at him. What do you mean? Pear gestured to the captains behind him. They wrote a report last year, after observing the mansion. They noticed your mother's messenger, who was connected to at least one killing squad, and they also noticed other messengers going in and out. I suspect your mother has spies outside the mansion, watching what happens around it. That's likely how she discovered that I and my son were in there. There are all kinds of messages being sent. In fact, these 2 captains intercepted a few, just as I had. 4th, your wife still had family up north, right? What village again? Rivers? Pear shook his head sadly. That's where the messages were going. And 4th, they were going to Garters. He heard one of the captains make a noise like a cough or a guffaw, but his companion elbowed him. 4th didn't notice anything, too caught up in the story Pear was creating for him. 5th, too, was staring wide-eyed at the High General. They didn't like what was happening to your wife here in the mansion, Fourth, Pear continued. She was writing to them, telling them how miserable she was. And she seemed to be suggesting that the youngest boy in the mansion may have been... Pear reached out and booped Fourth's nose as he had earlier that week. Fourth rocked backward. Worst nose shape nature ever came up with, Pear said sadly. Fortunately, it seems only one family in the world is cursed with it. I don't follow, Fourth said. Pear groaned. I was trying to be subtle in front of my captains and your sons, but Fourth, Fangy, he's yours, isn't he? Fourth began to blink more rapidly. Is he? You don't know? How could you not know? Well, he began hesitantly, no one really knows how long a baby takes to come. I mean, Mother said it can take up to 2 years, so Fangy could easily be his father's son. Pear pinched the bridge of his nose. Fourth, Fangy is his father's son, and everyone in the world knows it takes 9 to 10 moons for a baby to be born. It's never, in the history of our 280 years of existence in this world, ever taken longer than that. Really? Really? Oh, Pear sighed. Margot knew that, too. But we needed another boy in the mansion, you see, Fourth went on pathetically. And Mother said I was just helping along what was supposed to happen, and please stop, Pear cut him off, because Fifth's face had gone strangely contorted. I'll send Mrs. Kale from the garrison surgery to explain things better to both of you. She's eager to help, but she doesn't yet realize what I'm setting her up to do. He mumbled more to himself. Remembering his audience, he said, just realize, Fourth, that Margot knew, and she was unhappy. She wrote letters, and it seems that some of her family are connected to garters. And here's the really bad part, Fourth. Pear hesitated because it was getting complicated, and he wasn't sure Fourth was going to keep up. But the story would work. It had to work. Fourth, the garters have been talking, and it seems that some of the first people your great-grandparents kept, the parents of Seraphina or Danny or someone else, their relatives were garters, the very same ones that your great-grandfather Coral I tried to banish from Idumea. Fifth, Pear turned to make sure the 12-year-old was keeping up. What have you been told about the garters? The boy swallowed nervously. All arrogance was gone, replaced with appropriate fear. They were supposed to take care of Guide Pax. He was going to find a new place for the dissenters to live, but the guards killed him on the mountain. Mount Deceit, it's called? Yes, very good. That's what we named it after, their deceit. Keep going. So Quirrell I tried to kill all the bad guards, but some got away, and then other people ran to join them. I don't remember how many. Up to 2,000, by our best guesses, Pear supplied, surprised at how accurately Fifth knew this story. Surely the knowledge came from Margot and not Jessie. All right. And those people come back. Not the first people because they're all old and dead, but their descendants, mad about my great-great-grandfather punishing them for being bad. They shouldn't have killed the last guide, even if the writings are rubbish and the idea of a creator is silly. People should still be able to follow the guide out of the world. But why didn't they go out of the world? Or couldn't they? Pear prompted. Because outside of our villages and cities, the world is poisoned, Fifth explained. Because there's nowhere elsewhere safe to live. Guide Pax would have failed anyway to find them a place to live, but he should have been allowed to try. That's why the first was so mad at his guards. Killing Pax made everyone mad. So, where do those garters live now, Fifth? The boy blinked in confusion. Fourth, who'd been silent, now revived. Wait, where do they live? Pear sighed. That's what the Army's been trying to figure out for decades. Since everywhere outside is poisoned, then garters can't live outside our world. Many speculate that they live in the forests at the base of the mountains, above Edge of the World and Moorland, around Mount Deceit. But I fear it's something worse. Fourth, I think some of them live in the villages. undercover in disguise. People like Lieutenant Colonel Lazen. And I have reason to suspect that in the distant relatives of all those who just went over that wall are on their way back to attack you and your family because you've been holding them. Do you see what I'm getting at? If the Garters showed up and found you still holding their descendants as servants, that would be bad, Forth said tonelessly. That would be bad, Pear agreed. So I can't get them back? Forth squeaked. You can't get them back, Pear repeated. Your mother's not going to agree. She's going to want you to get them back, but you know better. You and Fifth, right? He turned to the boy. Fifth nodded, his face pale. If you try to get them back, the Garters will come after you, Pear repeated. Say it with me. I want to make sure you understand this. They repeated it together 3 times until Pear was sure that even the simplest message was received. How do you know all of this? Forth asked, and Pear knew he'd be struggling to keep it all straight. He gestured to the captains behind him. What did I say they wrote? A report? Very good. And what happened to them because of that report? My mother heard about it and probably told Stumpy to transfer them. Exactly. She didn't like what was in that report. And while I don't think either of the captains realized an officer of the garrison was involved, any investigation may have revealed Lazen eventually. Now he's gone. And now hopefully the rest of the killing squads will get the word and smartly fade into nothingness. You're safe now, Forth, and now your servants are freed, and now word will trickle back to the Garters as well that you should no longer be a target. You're welcome. Get into the house, find some bread, make your sons a sandwich. Fifth looks like he's going to topple over from starvation. And don't forget to carry an Orin. It's all up to you now, Forth. No one's here to help you. But I'll send you a new bookkeeper who can help you work out a budget and figure out how many employees you can hire and pay. That's a big house with extensive gardens. Good thing Jezzy isn't paying for killing squads anymore, so all that expense to go to paying citizens for a job well done. Forth began. What? Pear sighed. Sometimes he did talk too much. Feed your boys. I'll send help over later. Go into the mansion, Forth. All right. It took him a minute to figure out how to carry his sleeping 7-year-old, and again Pear felt a pang of sympathy for the man. Watching him strain under the first manual labor he'd likely ever done in his 37 years was pitiable. Pear would send over 6 helpers as soon as possible. Matilda surely had connections. He nodded to his captains as they turned back to the gate. Well done, not saying anything. One of them guffawed. Sir, about our report? You took quite a few liberties. He was all innocence as he said, I did? High General, we never wrote anything about Garters. Oh, you didn't? Could have sworn I read that somewhere last night. The captains grinned. How do you do that? Lie so easily. It wasn't all a lie, he said as they walked slowly back to the gate. I said I had reason to believe, correct? Well, I do. Any reasonable Garter would want to raid that mansion, and I believe in reasonableness. Wait, said the other captain, that's not exactly what you said, though. Isn't it? Well, I can't remember. Same words, different order. Message got through, though. The Quarrels will never do what's right, but they'll always do what will protect them. If I have to explain things a little differently to help them understand, what does that matter? You, High General, sir, began one of the captains with too much reverence, are definitely no Stumpy. Boys, that's the nicest thing anyone could have ever said to me. The last of the family was now over the rock wall, and because Pear was feeling traditional, he walked through the gates. The crowd looked to him for the next thing. Load up, he called. We'll bring you to where we can get a good meal, find a place to rest, and in the meantime, men from the army will be packing up your possessions for your new homes. That froze everyone in place. Reckon, who was halfway up into the wagon, turned around. New homes? Yes, and you'll have a say in what happens next. We're going to relocate you out of the way of danger. Reckon leaped off the wagon and marched up to him. You said there was no danger. There's always some danger, Reckon. You know that. But the real danger is from that woman crashing around in her mansion. She had up to 60 men in her killing squads, maybe more. That's a lot for those of you who don't know the numbers, he added. We have 5 in custody and 1 who died. That's not a lot, which means if Jesse is feeling vindictive, she may still find a way to send someone after you. By next week, I intend to have all of you living in another village where Jesse will never think to look, and you'll begin your new lives. With learning? Clematis asked. With learning. We call it school, and we'll create a special one just for all of you, whatever you want to learn. Reckon looked back at the family, some in wagons, some climbing in, others still uncertain, but there was an expression of consensus on their faces. Reckon nodded at them. Let's start a new life, he called, and the family continued to load up. He turned back to Pear. Wilbur. I'm sorry, what? Wilbur. That's my real name. You can know it now. Pear grinned. Wilbur. Wilbur. You know, if you don't mind, I think I like Reckon better. That's more you, the name of a leader. Reckon smiled back. I think so too. You asked Seraphina her last name. Is that the second name people have? It is. Everyone in the world took a family name probably 150 years ago now. Somehow the trend skipped you lot in the mansion. Well, how do I get a last name? Take whatever you want at this point, I suppose. Pear wasn't at all surprised by what he said next. Then my name is now Wilbur Reckon. It's perfect. Welcome to the world, Mr. Reckon. And that's the end of Chapter 4. Thank you.